Hello and welcome to today's NDI webinar, where we discuss our recently released Insider Incident Data Exchange Standard. My name is Dan Costa. I'm Technical Manager of the Enterprise Threat and Vulnerability Management Team here at Software Engineering Institute, and I want to thank you for joining us today. I'd like to thank those of you who had a chance to submit some questions that we can use to structure our discussion today, giving you an opportunity to get your question asked and answered about not only our work on Insider Incident Data Exchange Standard, as well as our broader body of research in the area of insider risk management. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by my colleague Austin Snit, a senior researcher on our Insider Risk Team here at the IIDES. Austin, in addition to being the brains behind the Insider Incident Data Exchange Standard, has a variety of backgrounds and experiences in AIL, in the application of those skills to insider risk management, workforce development, really one of the best and bright we have here at the Institute. Austin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Alex, for the glowing introduction there.
It's a pleasure to catch up with you, Austin. So today we want to make our session as interactive as possible. We'd certainly encourage you, if you have questions throughout based on what we're presenting, please enter them into the chat. We'll get as many of those addressed as we can as we go throughout. So today we're going to be talking about the Insider Incident Data Exchange Standard. And we're just a few days past being able to talk about IIDES in March. So sorry for that. But what we're going to walk you through is what we've developed, why we've developed what we've developed, how we've developed it, how we see organizations taking advantage of this capability, what we're thinking in terms of next steps for the development, refinement of kind of future iterations of this standard, and how you, the community, can engage with us to kind of help us make this product as best as it can be in satisfying a wide array of needs. So Austin, I know you've pulled together some materials. You're going to walk us through some of those basics. As we go throughout, I'm going to be interjecting some of the questions that we've received in advance. I'll also be keeping an eye on the chat. As we get questions, we go throughout. We'll get those asked and answered. And if we have a little bit of time at the back end, what I'd like to do is also address some of the broader kind of insider risk management research questions we've received as well. So certainly, if you're watching, you're live and you have the opportunity to weigh in with questions, feel free to lob those out, both kind of for the Insider Incident Data Exchange Standard specifically, as well as broader kind of insider risk management research questions. We're happy to address those as well. So Austin, I'm going to turn it over to you. Looking forward to kind of walking through what we've got, how we got there, and what we hope folks will benefit from considering the adoption of this standard.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Maybe the easiest thing to do first is just kind of give folks an idea of the problem that we're trying to address, why IIDES, at all. So you can think of your, most recent insider incident that you may have had in your organization, or maybe one that sticks out in your mind. We have a lovely example here from Jurassic Park, for those that don't recognize it. And the idea is that something has happened in your organization, or maybe you're concerned about something may happen with an insider. What information do you need to collect? What should you be thinking about in terms of collecting different fields? Where do you collect it? Where do you store it? For certain organizations, they need to share it either internally or maybe externally with law enforcement or something like that, or maybe to a more central location in their own organization. So how do you share it? What kind of processes should you follow? What fields should you share? Those sorts of things. And then also tracking incidents over time and doing metrics and writing reports and seeing if your organization is getting better or worse with insider trends. So those are the kinds of questions that we're trying to address with IIDES, and hopefully the standard helps address those questions. So what is IIDES? It's the Insider Incidents Data Exchange Standard, and Dan, I'll give you credit for that name. Very cool. And yes, we did a little intro to this in March for another group as well, and we got to do the whole IIDES in March thing, which is great. So it's intended for a bunch of different people. We have practitioners, operational analysts, and people like that who are trying to put out the fires and do their jobs, who just kind of need a place to store information and track information. It's also intended for folks like ourselves who are more on the research side that want to do more of the deeper analysis, long-term trends, and things like that. So a wide variety of people that we're hoping we can help out a little bit here. The schema itself is written in JSON. It's just kind of the way that we specifically defined it. But there is a whole lot of documentation for it. It's available publicly on GitHub. You can see the link down here on our CMU SEI IIDES GitHub repo. So this is a picture of the data structure itself. So IIDES has 7 what we're calling core components, and that's this picture on the right side here. So we have our incident component, which is sort of the central component of IIDES, and then related to that, we have lots of different components like TTPs, for example, tactics, techniques, and procedures, the things an insider may have done, the actions they may have taken. We also have organization information, specific information about the insider, which would include things like insider demographics and things like that, but also things like predispositions or stressors or things like that as well. And then you can see on the left all of the other additional components that we're looking to support here. And this is something where we're trying to address a bunch of different needs with the standards, and not everyone may be using all of these different components, but we're trying to kind of get a variety of things that folks can work with.
Austin, I think this is also a wonderful visual that drives home why we needed something specific for insider incidents as opposed to, something like, for example, just straight cybersecurity incidents that may be perpetrated by kind of external threat actors. Can you talk a little bit to kind of like the uniqueness of insider incidents, how organizations respond to those, what they do with the information that they gather as they're kind of responding to and analyzing potential incidents that kind of differentiates this space from maybe just traditional cybersecurity incident response?
Yeah, absolutely. And we did look into trying to fit this in with some of the existing cybersecurity standards, and there are places where that matches up a little bit. But you're right, there are lots of additional fields that are relevant to insiders that just weren't covered with those existing standards. So for example, the job role information. So things you want to track are things like job title, for example, and then also whether the person had access to information or what level of data access they may have had as part of that job role. And that type of field just wasn't available as part of those cyber standards. I mentioned also the stressors, or the predispositions, things like that. Things like motivation, right? So like financial gain versus revenge or something along those lines just aren't covered in those existing standards. So we did try to play nice where we could, where things match up. For example, the TTPs are very commonly addressed in several different cyber security type of standards, but things like job or insider predisposition weren't. So that's what we're trying to get at a little bit with this.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think insider risk management poses some really unique opportunities for organizations, right? When we get to learn about kind of the concerning behaviors and activity that preceded the harmful acts in a way that we don't get to learn about when the attack is being initiated from outside of our organization, right? This gives us an opportunity to do things like identify the root causes of these incidents in ways that we don't typically get the opportunity to explore, research, investigate, address, and correct when we're talking about kind of external cybersecurity incidents. And based on our research, what we've seen is, those, opportunities for more proactive responses to the root causes of these insider incidents, broadens the scope of what we even typically think of as security controls. We're into management practices and leveraging kind of capabilities and processes and support functions that stakeholders like human resources can provide, ethics and compliance departments, right? These are the hallmarks of an effective enterprise-wide insider risk management approach. And the way we got to learn that these are the most effective kind of ways to address those root causes is through the collection and analysis of what happens before the bad thing. So You don't have that opportunity in most instances when we're talking about kind of external threat actors. So because of the kind of uniqueness of the relationship between kind of the attacker and the victim organization, when we're talking about kind of insider incidents, and I know for some people it can be uncomfortable to talk about our employees as potential attackers. We're taking a risk management based approach here. But again, the response options here are not just disable the port or protocol to walk somebody out the door. It's connect them to HR resources, improve our management practices, make the organization a better place to work, improve the employer employee dynamic, which has the happy side effect of reducing risk. So because those opportunities exist on insider incident data collection and analysis, we really do have to broaden the scope of kind of the dynamics of what happened before, during, and after into how we standardize and normalize the terminology we use to describe those activities.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that, the standard is trying to support whichever pieces of those that information different organizations may be interested in collecting. So there may be times where the particular program isn't looking at response, right, for whatever example or something like that. They can kind of ignore that piece, but they want to focus on the insider and the connection to the supervisor and things like that, and they can track that with other sections of IDES. So we've tried to build in that flexibility with it.
Yeah, and you nailed one of the questions that we were asked in advance of this webcast, Austin, which was, how have you taken special care and consideration into what you've developed here to make sure that you can account for the fact that organizations do things differently when it comes to insider risk management. I think you hit the nail on the head with kind of the modularity of the approach that we took to designing these components. We can all kind of nod our heads and say yes, like an overarching strategy would involve some aspect of each of these 7 components, but we're not necessarily being prescriptive to say that all 7 of these things must exist for you to count as an insider incident. And then within each of those components, there's additional fields and information that is optional that allows you to kind of plug in the things that make sense for your organization and omit the kind of optional pieces that don't resonate with the way that you do what it is that you do on the insider risk management side.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good place for us to dig a little bit into the different pieces of IDES and why we think it's worth the organizations, different types of organizations, maybe using. So, we've mentioned fields a couple of times, the different attributes. So, for example, if we were talking about the insider core component, some of the fields might be things like first name or age or things like that. So, the specific fields, specific information that could be collected as part of the standard, although it's, as you said, Dan, optional. All of our fields are optional. The other piece that we're providing with this is vocabularies. So certain fields have a list of preset vocabularies to choose from. There are, I think, over 20 different vocabularies as part of the standard. And then the relationships. So if you'd like to take a look real quick at some examples of those. So we have the impact is one of the components of IDES. It's one of the subcomponents off of the incident core component. So in the impact component, we have a bunch of different fields listed here in the documentation as properties. Kind of depends on what your background is, whether it's data science or database administration or schema. Different people have different words for things. But the fields here for impact are things like high, low, metric, whether or not it's estimated, and a space for a comment. And then within that, one of the fields here, the metric, has a vocabulary associated with it. So the vocabulary for that looks like this. So we've essentially predefined a bunch of different things that, from our own experience, we see in our data, different things that you might be trying to track as impacts as a result of a particular incident on an organization. So files stolen, for example, employees affected, documents read, things like that. One thing I'd like to point out with this is that we've provided the different constants. In this case, they're just numbers 1 through 16. If an organization didn't like the way we've labeled these particular things, the values we've used, they could use a different set of labels without affecting the standard, without affecting sharing with other organizations. or if your primary language is not English, for example, you could easily change the labels to whatever the primary language is that you're using, again, without affecting the shareability of the data itself. So that's one of the ways that we try to provide some flexibility with this. And then the last component there was the relationships, and those are basically those connections between all of the different components within IIDES. So, for example, we see our impacts hanging off of that incident component here, and an incident can have a whole bunch of different impacts. It may have affected files and employees, for example, so we have space to do that. So I guess I'll pause there and see if we have any questions on what those primary keys of IIDES are: the fields, the vocabularies, and the relationships.
Also, nothing specific about kind of what we've presented so far. There is a question that's come up that'll feed into a subset of things that we had kind of for some of the later presentation materials. But maybe this is a good time to kind of, help folks understand where and how they go about accessing what we've put together so far.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the best place to start is going to be our GitHub page, and that's linked in a bunch of different places. Let me see the. So in this case, it's our impact page, but just github.com/cmusei/IIDES is the best place to kind of start. In that repository, there's a white paper that goes into a lot more detail about our approach and what we considered as we were developing it, and kind of displays in just in more detail what these different pieces of IIDES are. So I would start there. There's also documentation. This slide is actually just a screenshot from that documentation, so you can kind of play around with that. And the JSON schema itself is in there as well for those that are more inclined to the technical side to develop something customized off of this.
Yeah, fantastic. So hopefully we've now got some folks kind of poking along with us in the repository. Austin, great job kind of laying out kind of what this is. I'd love for you to give us a little bit more on kind of how we've built it, some of the guiding principles, some of the lessons learned from taking what was kind of the way we've been collecting and analyzing insider incidents for quite some time, and then tailoring that for kind of a much broader set of use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dan, you're probably more familiar with the start of this than I am, but I know we've been collecting information related to insider threat for a couple of decades at this point. So we have a lot of experience and lessons learned when it comes to what to store and how to store it and what fields to use and what's useful just in general for different analysis. So we took that experience and that expertise, as well as input over the years from different people that we've worked with, as to what's useful for folks. And from that, we have a sort of a set of guiding principles along with this. We want it to be simple, practical, flexible, and interoperable. Um, so for simplicity, we didn't add any unnecessary constraints or any particular requirements. We're not requiring specific components. We're not requiring specific fields to be used or anything like that. It's really meant for the community to kind of take and pick the pieces that work for them and just kind of disregard the pieces that don't work. Um, we want it to be directly applicable to current practice. We didn't want this to be too high level, academic, theoretical. We want it to be useful for the community. We do have some room for customization, like I mentioned with the impact vocabulary. For example, if you have a non-English language, it's very easy to just change that and still be shareable if necessary. Um, and we're not providing at the moment any implementation of IIDES. We can talk more about that in a minute if you want. But as folks are implementing it for themselves locally, they can customize it, add fields, right? Change relationships, things like that, however they want to do that. Whatever's useful, right, for the community. And then to the best of our ability, we tried to make this compatible with different existing standards that are either insider threat specific or kind of insider threat adjacent. We mentioned the cybersecurity example. There's several frameworks that help track external cyber threats, right, and different TTPs and things like that. So We did try to provide room to use those where it makes sense. And then also pulling some of the vocabulary as well from those, where there was a lot of overlap.
In Austin, keep me honest here, but there's extensibility baked in where if there's another vocabulary that's out there that an organization has curated, there's a way to support that kind of within this standard as well.
There is, and we can do that a couple of different ways. We put this out publicly because we want feedback and we want contributions from the community. So if there's something out there that makes sense for us to just include in IIDES, we would love to hear that, and we'll try to just go ahead and integrate that and basically just update the version so that everyone can benefit from that. And if it doesn't make sense to include it directly with IIDES for whatever reason, there's also options for customization, including additional vocabulary terms, for example, in your organization locally, however you need to.
Yeah, that's great. So really appreciate you walking us through kind of some of the how. Now talk to us a little bit about the so what. Who do we see using this for what reasons, what purposes? What are the benefits of kind of taking the time to start to figure out how to use this?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Maybe it'll help a little bit for a few folks to see a quick example here in the kind of the schema formats itself. So we have in this case, an example of Oliver Griffin as an insider who stole some things. And you can see that some of the fields from the incident component are sitting in here. And then the vocabularies, all of these are from our provided vocabularies through IIDES. So for example, CIA effects, the C stands for confidentiality, incident type E stands for espionage, and so on. So we provide those standards there. And then all of that connects. In this case, we have impacts included here. So, I showed the documentation on the impact side. We have the high, low. In this case, I believe this is files. I'd have to go back and look. The metric here is metric 7, right? Whatever that is, whether that's documents or, yeah, documents. So that's how that all kind of fits together on the back end, right? If you were sharing it or exporting it or importing it from someone else into your system, that's kind of what it looks like.
And
So
Austin, it's
yeah,
it's worth pointing out that the data that we're showing in this example is hypothetical data. It's fake data. To the best of our knowledge, no one named Oliver Griffin has done these things. Just trying to give you a sense of kind of what this looks like, when incident data is expressed this way. So
right.
I figured I would cover our bases there.
Good point. And this example is actually, you can see the full example in the examples folder, which again is on the public GitHub repository if you want to dig into what it looks like. So what does this all get us? Basically, it boils down to consistency. Consistency when it comes to sharing, whether that's internally or with external investigators or researchers or someone like that. Whether you're using that like raw JSON formats or you're doing like statistical summaries, at least you're still using the same fields that everyone else understands, how those fields are defined and things like that. It gives us consistency with reporting. I think organizations always appreciate that, especially sort of the top level executives, consistent reporting over time, and also across analysts for organizations that have multiple analysts, right? Having the same fields, the same structure gives us that consistency in reporting. And then also on the analysis side, once we have that consistency with the specific fields, we can start doing things like trending. We can start doing statistical analysis. We have these precise definitions, in many cases, quantitative fields that we can start doing some of that really interesting trending and analysis on.
Austin, I wanted to get your thoughts on, the feasibility of a very specific kind of example of information sharing. You mentioned it kind of before, organization to organization, right? Um, when you get organizations who are willing to share this type of information, which is really sensitive, someone within their organization has misused their authorized access, either on purpose or by accident, to cause some harm to organizations, right? Some stuff organizations, for a variety of different reasons, have been kind of historically not super ready to share. When you find organizations who are ready to share, there's the right level of sharing that needs to be kind of established and identified. Do we need to use names? Do we need to bring back everything we know about kind of the personally identifiable information of an individual? Absolutely not in many instances. So how can organizations interested in sharing, find that sweet spot of how much or how little information they're comfortable moving? And then how does IDES kind of facilitate that?
Yeah, so we have the same kind of concerns as well, and it really boils down to both the implementation of IDES and then also just the organization's processes themselves. So, for example, in our internal implementation, we have a defined set of what are called restricted fields, and it's those types of kind of identifiable type of fields, like the name of the insider, the name of the organization, things like that we can basically click a button and say exclude these fields from any kind of export or something like that. But that's the specific fields that we've chosen as an organization that we think are relevant for our purposes when it comes to sharing. We also, for example, can do the same thing with like the comments sections, the comment fields that are in a lot of the different components, notes, comments, author names for the notes, things like that, that just might not be that relevant if you were to share it with someone else. So again, that's our setup. That's how we've defined that. So any organization would have to handle that themselves, right? Which fields are we concerned about excluding? Same kind of thing when it comes to security permissions, right? Who can see which fields, right? We can do the same thing again depending on the implementation. So maybe there's sort of a viewer role that doesn't get to do any editing. Maybe there's a manager role. Um, Maybe you could exclude all of the restricted fields for a restricted viewer, right? Depending again on the implementation and how you want to define those things. We don't define that as part of IDES because it's so specific to different organizations. We just kind of leave room for organizations to implement it with whatever types of controls they need to implement.
So let me try to summarize that, and you keep me honest here, right? This is a schema, right? The implementation of that schema would be done in a database, and the way that we would restrict who can, the fields would be the way we restrict fields in any database that's using any schema, right? So we're really kind of leaving that up to kind of the implementers of this schema in a particular database to do good database things like establish different views, deploy role-based access control, right? Follow kind of good hygiene as it pertains to how we structure this information and how we provide different subsets of access to the contents of a database like this. But the beauty of the schema is it provides you the ability to do that kind of at the field level, which is something we've taken great care and attention to make sure we can provide to folks that are out there interested in using this.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. And I would add on to that too that for those that maybe aren't quite ready to think about some major web app or database, privileged access, those sorts of things, it could even come down to something as simple as, making sure that specific fields are deleted from the Excel spreadsheet before you send it, to the other part of your organization or something like that. So, I don't want people to get, too nervous about, oh gee, I have to implement this in some fancy web application with a top tier database access controls, et cetera. Certainly can do that, and it's designed to facilitate that. The definitions are there to do that kind of application, but you could also just use this with whatever existing processes. Maybe you're just using Excel to track things and SharePoint or something like that, or Word or PDFs or things like that. You can still leverage IDES, leverage the fields and the definitions and the vocabularies that we provide for that. Won't get you the type of access controls maybe that the database could, but it's an option as well.
Yeah, really good stuff, Austin. So want to pivot now into just where we're at in the process here, right? So we're coming up for air with the kind of first cut at the generalization of how we've been collecting and analyzing incident data for a long time. We've worked with other organizations, the public and private sector, to help them kind of build out similar capabilities to get the most out of this data that they have available to them. Where are we in terms of kind of the newness of this? What are we seeing in terms of kind of early interest, adoption, etc.? And maybe we'll stop there, and then we can talk about what's next.
Okay. Yeah, so we have gotten a good bit of interest from just kind of community discussions and people asking really good questions and clearly thinking through how they might use this for their organizations. We have gotten some vendor interest as well, which would be excellent if we could get some of the vendors to conform to the standard, provide input to the standard as well. Ideally, right, that would mean that people could use different vendors without worry about having to then change data formats or something if they needed to change vendors for whatever reason. So we've gotten a lot of really good interest from the community at large. The standard itself is pretty new, and the publication I think went on to GitHub maybe December last year, so it's only been out a few months. We're starting to see some good questions coming in from the repo, which is nice. That means people are looking at it and starting to think through it. In terms of contributions, we're at a point where we're really looking for feedback, right? How interested people are. Things like, hey, this is really good, but the vocabulary doesn't quite work for me. Like those types of feedback would be super helpful for us. Um, Depending on how much feedback we receive, how many changes we need to make over the next few months, will determine whether we can move this into like a 1.0 type of standard that works for most people. If there's a lot of interest, if there's a lot of people that really want to have a hand in additional development on it, we would consider doing maybe like a working group type of situation in the future if there's that much interest to support it. So I guess in summary, we're pretty open to inputs, and we're willing to take it in whatever direction the community needs it to go.
Yeah, great stuff. I think we've got a few kind of suggestions already for kind of things to consider based on the comments that I'm seeing in the chat. So, you know, shy of lobbing those over the fence to you and having you litigate those in real time, I think the way that we'll respond to those is say thank you. Austin and I will huddle and take a look at kind of those and try to find a way to kind of follow up specifically that says like, hey, yep, on the feature list for the next kind of iteration of this, or like actually we've already got that kind of done kind of here. So for the folks that are kind of chipping in with kind of like specific questions about that, I think that's the most effective way for us to address those. Okay, Austin, what's next? Where do we see kind of this going? We've talked about some kind of really good use cases so far. Organization to organization, kind of within an organization. We talked a lot about moving maybe from kind of the analytics side to kind of the programmatic side. There's some other use cases that we've identified for parts of the organization that are responsible for generating things like annual reports. Here's what we're seeing. This is kind of the visibility we have into kind of this risk relative to the investment we've made in attempting to buy down this risk to these acceptable levels. There's the tiered organization use case where headquarters is doing some layer of insider incident, triage and analysis. Different lines of business, different parts of the world, they're responsible for kind of a specialized subset of that. How do we facilitate information exchange up and down in that kind of scenario? So we've got additional use cases there to kind of work through, but past the kind of minor improvements for kind of some of these other scenarios. What's on your wish list here as we continue to gather feedback from the community?
Well, I suppose what's on my wish list is just kind of being used in the real world, right? And collecting feedback from that. We are hoping at some point to publish our own application that conforms to this. So that could be something in the future that gets used and worked out. Um, but those two use cases that you mentioned are the ones that we've gotten sort of the most feedback on, the most traction with, that sort of risk management based, how do I use this for analytics and things like that? So we could imagine a little bit more support on the risk management component or the incident response component, even for that. That's some of the areas where we haven't done quite as much in terms of specifying fields and vocabularies. So that could maybe be a piece if that's what the community is interested in. Um, so yeah, I think just kind of focusing on what the needs are and hopefully improving those version numbers and getting that integrated on GitHub and kind of letting the community take some charge with it would be great.
Yeah, that's great. It's right in line with our role as a federally funded research and development center, right? Here's the standard. Help us make it better so that it's doing what we think you need it to do. Here's how we can help move the market and shape the future. Normalize across kind of the solution space, whether we're using case management tools or risk registers. If we're trying to talk about kind of insider incident, here's a standard we can use to kind of move throughout those different tools and capabilities and do things like avoid vendor lock-in. If the only place we've kind of established the body of knowledge of kind of the ways that these things have happened within our organizations, what we've done as a result of those things has been expressed within one tool in some very structured and specific format, and we want to switch vendors or that product becomes end of life. Now we've got a ton of work to do to kind of replicate that body of knowledge somewhere else in the absence of a translation mechanism that can get you from one tool to the next, right? So that is kind of one of the pieces and parts of kind of the future of this that I'm really, really interested in. And one of the motivations for starting to put some thought into kind of what a working group around this would look like, so that we can engage those solution providers early and then make it as easy as possible for them to start using this as a way that they can kind of import or export information to and from their systems. So I think the future is bright in this space, and we're really excited to continue to help organizations find ways that they can use this to get smarter about the data that they have and get the most out of the data they have as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been really heartened to see the feedback we've gotten so far, just with this sort of initial release, initial kind of push about what IIDES is. We've gotten some great questions and great feedback, and even a little bit of help on the GitHub repos so far. So that's really, really encouraging.
Fantastic. Okay, Austin, I promised that we wouldn't just talk about IIDES. I think we've covered this, sufficiently. Great job to you and the team. We can't wait to see kind of, how this meets the community's needs and work with you all to kind of make this, better, improve it, mature this a little bit. But I can't get us out of here without having the just talk and shop questions that we got about kind of insider risk research more broadly. There was a theme that emerged in some of the questions that we got before this. Twofold. And both sides of that coin involved AI. There was the AI for insider risk management piece, and there were the insider risk implications of increased adoption of artificial intelligence. So, why don't we just get your quick thoughts on the first one? The benefits, limitations of the adoption of artificial intelligence into insider risk analysis processes, and then maybe we could talk about the flip side of the coin later.
Yeah, sure. So I think uh, one of the hardest pieces about AI integration, really in any kind of enterprise solution, is making sure that decision makers understand what the trade-offs are with some of these different models that we're looking at. Sometimes it can be kind of difficult to understand. On the technical side, we're talking about things like confusion matrices and false positives and false negatives, and what the true accuracy is, right, and things like that. And it doesn't always translate easily into sort of a risk management type of speak. It's a different vocabulary. So I think that's one of the major things to think through for any organization that's trying to incorporate AI into their insider risk management practices or tool sets is what are these tools actually doing? What do they mean when they say they're 99% accurate? What how is a false positive defined, right? Are they trying to look at, specific malicious things on the network? Are they trying to do like risk scoring, right? Those types of things. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing when it comes to my mind, is just understanding what the tools are doing and what the trade-offs are with the tools that incorporate AI.
Austin, one thing I would add to that I think we've seen to be really important is in many instances, we're looking at the adoption of these tools or techniques to replace some way that we're currently already trying to observe concerning behaviors and activity from an insider risk management perspective. So having that basis for comparison is really important so that we know here's how good we were at being able to see or do something about kind of these conditions before. Here's what it looks like with this new tech integrated so that we can compare, right? Now, in some instances, we've got these behaviors that we've identified as like, gee, wouldn't it be great to have the ability to make this detection? We just can't figure out how to do that with existing technology. And that's where, there may be the opportunity to kind of, unlock some new detectables, right? But in many instances, we're talking about kind of comparison over kind of existing approaches. So taking the time to do that due diligence and understand what your detective and response baselines are, I think is really important for organizations.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I think that
Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying I agree. I think that baselines can really help when organizations are making that kind of transition. And I would add also that there are lots of little places for AI tools to help, just kind of be like a helper function for the analysts that are doing the really important piece of the work. Things like sifting through a large amount of video that you might not want to sit for 8 hours and just kind of watch, right? Because you have lots of other things to do, or sifting through lots of files or something like that. That's where those tools can really help. So I agree. Please, Dan, what else were you gonna say?
Well, I was gonna ask you to consider the flip side of this, which is the kind of insider risk implications of increased adoption of artificial intelligence across organizations. Want to get your high level thoughts on, as organizations look to AI to do more and more things for them, does that introduce new areas of insider risk? Does that increase the rates of the risk levels, the risk exposures of organizations from an insider risk management perspective? Should we be worried about this at all, or is this cool? Go for it.
I think with any change in technology, that you always have to kind of change your practices and consider, right, the pros and cons of each. I mean, I think many people in our space and insider risk are aware of some of the things that AI has brought up recently over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, things like um, AI-based mouse jigglers, right, or something like that, or people putting their work on ChatGPT to help them summarize, right, when it's like an internal document or something like that. So, I mean, that's certainly a space where it's changed. It's just that our employees are maybe more likely or more excited or something about trying to use some of these new tools, which might not be ideal for the organization as a whole. Um, and I think on the insider threats detection side of things, we also benefit from it. So there's definitely a trade off there. I know you have some thoughts on this one as well. If you'd like to add on to what I have.
Well, I've got thoughts. I've also got an entire event planned wrapped around addressing this question. Uh, Quick plug, June 12th, come see us in Arlington, Virginia for the 12th Annual Insider Risk Management Symposium. This year's theme, technology-driven changes to the insider risk landscape. Really designed to get both public and private sector, different kind of different sector, different organizational context perspectives on what are the challenges they see as their organizations consider or start to adopt, this emerging technology and use, our critical assets in ways that we haven't done before. From my perspective, what we're seeing is the rise of human machine teams and even humans being removed from the loop entirely in more and more critical business processes that we are traditionally kind of looking to kind of humans to do for us. And we've just spent 25 years trying to wrap our heads around what happens when that authorized access to our organization's critical assets to do the things that makes our organizations function, what happens when that access is misused, to build the body of knowledge around what those miscases look like and what the precursor activities were. So now we're taking people out of the equation, we're putting autonomous systems, AI powered systems in their place, and we don't know what the equivalent for that incident progression is. Okay? We don't know what the equivalent of being disgruntled is for one of these systems. So we've got some real kind of foundational work to do to understand that, to learn what the right compensated controls are, to learn what the new detective mechanisms need to be. And effectively, what is the AI or autonomous system analog or equivalent for many of the human focused controls that we've spent so long developing and deploying for insider risk management programs. So, other than that, no concerns at all. And like I said, really excited about the opportunity to kind of unpack this with organizations in June in Arlington with us. And Austin, you'll certainly be there, as somebody who's done great work for us, helping to, enumerate the pros and cons associated with the adoption of artificial intelligence into an insider risk analysis process. I think that's going to be a really important part of the conversation. And then the bigger kind of issue that I think we as a community have to start looking to address is, what do we do now that insiders are no longer just humans? So come on out, join us for what should be a fun and exciting series of conversations around that topic. Austin, amazing conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise. Really, really, really looking forward to getting everybody's feedback on the insider incident data expression standard. So I want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. And hello to everyone out there. I hope to hear some feedback from some folks.
And I want to thank you all for joining us today on our SEI webcast series. Please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Please also make available kind of the insider incident data expression standard. The link will be in the description of this video. We'll also follow up with an email containing the link to that artifact to those that registered for this in advance, as well as some other more recent publications from our team in the area of insider risk. So again, thank you, Austin. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Just a quick note, our next webcast is April 23rd. It will be, the topic will be malware research. If you cannot replicate it, you will not use it, by Lee Metcalf and Ed Schwartz.